This is my new Gen 2 2x72 inch tilting belt grinder. I've already put up a build video on my channel about this machine with the platen attachment and table holder. I showed off all of the advantages of Gen 2 compared to Gen 1, but in this video, I'm going to be just going into the contact wheel attachment and the small wheel attachment that work with this machine. So when you tilt the grinder, you'll notice that the center of the contact wheel stays in place. So this allows me to use the same table for both orientations and not move the table. In order to do that, the axle of the contact wheel has to be in line with the hinge. So I can't really change where this axle is. If it's higher or lower, that would make it come out off center on the table when it's tilted. So because of this, the original belt grinder could only take 8-inch and 10-inch contact wheels. With this belt grinder, I have made a couple of changes so I can still keep the axle in line with the hinge, but it can now take anything from 10-inch down to 6-inch. I've moved the motor down slightly so the belt will be on more of an angle, and I've moved the frame tube up a little bit relative to the hinge, so it provides just enough clearance that the belt won't rub here, even if you're using a 6-inch contact wheel. The original contact wheel attachment was designed to have interchangeable wheels, so you could have several different wheels and just attach them all to the same fork. With this one, I've made it even easier to change these wheels because there's no washer here. Here's the video of me assembling the original one, and you can see how much of a struggle it is to put this washer in. So you just have a bolt. You take the bolt out, take the wheel out, put a new wheel in, put the bolt in. That's all there is to it. This is achieved by using a little piece of DOM that can contact this inside race of the bearing instead of having to put a washer in there. Also, the original contact wheel attachment had a flange here that allowed you to adjust the tracking because it's really hard to weld these fork sides on just right. It's really easy to make them a little bit crooked, which throws off the wheel, which throws off the tracking. So on this one, instead, I've made it so that you weld the fork side on and then weld this little piece of DOM in. And it's much easier to get this DOM in the right place. So it eliminates the need for the tracking flange. This attachment is just much, much simpler than the original. Here's some footage of the original one, and you can see how there's just a lot more going on here. It's way more complicated. On the original one, I put these holder sides in line with the hinge, which doesn't really matter. All that matters is that the wheel itself is in line with the hinge. These holder sides can be kicked off to the side like this, and that doesn't make any difference. So this way, I could make this plate that the holder sides are bolted onto, just welded directly to the tool arm. So only two parts. It's extremely simple. The other thing this does is it makes it so I only need one deflector wheel, whereas the old one had to have two, one on each side of this holder. And because it's kind of tucked back behind the wheel, if you're not using it, the belt just goes directly from here up to the tracking wheel. And this isn't in the way, so it can stay here all the time. Whereas with my old design, it had to be removed when it wasn't in use. This attachment can use any wheel from 3/8 inch diameter up to 2-inch if you're using the deflector wheel. If you're not using the deflector wheel, then you can go all the way up to 2 3/4 inch. Technically, you could also use a 1/4 inch wheel, but I wouldn't recommend using a 1/4 inch wheel for too long because the belt will be dragging on the bottom of this part. Now that you've seen what's new with the small wheel attachment and the contact wheel attachment, let's go ahead and get started on the build. I'll start by building the contact wheel attachment. I started by printing and rough cutting these templates from the plans and then sticking them onto the steel. A lot of the parts that you see here are for the main belt grinder because I cut all the parts at once. I stuck them to the steel using this Super 77 spray adhesive and then used my portaband to cut them out. So here's how the attachment goes together. These two spacers hold the fork sides at the appropriate distance apart to hold the axle. I chamfered the spacers and the tool arm where they meet so that they can have a V to fill with weld. It's important that these parts don't have any burrs or any kind of junk on them that's going to keep them from sitting flat against each other, since they need to be flat reference surfaces. There will be quite a lot of force on a small area here, so it's important that these are welded on really solidly. I chamfered the spacers and the fork sides where they meet, and then proceeded to try to clamp the fork sides onto the tool arm. And I decided it would be easier to just do one side at a time. I tapped the fork side into position and then checked that it was at a 20-degree angle to the tool arm, and then tack welded it in place. Again, I made sure these reference surfaces were clean before I clamped them together. Notice I did not weld on these interior corners, because that would have warped the fork sides towards each other. The end of each fork side will get a short piece of this DOM welded to it for the bolt to pass through. Where this contacts, it needs to be ground square. This can be done on the belt grinder just using a table that you know is square to the platen and rotating it a little bit between each grind. You end up with this sort of crosshatch pattern, which indicates it's square. I need 2 of these pieces, so I can cut this one off and then repeat the steps for the other end. Squaring the end works best with a longer piece, so it's best to square the end, then cut off the 5/8 inch long piece that we need. I checked the width of the hub on my contact wheel, and it is exactly 2 inches. So I just set up these 2 holder ends exactly 2 inches apart on this bolt and double nutted that. And now I need to jig something up to position this in place on the end of the forks. I made a stack of material that totals 1 inch high, which is what we need for this, and clamped that down to the tool arm. And you'll notice I was making sure those pieces were clean, that there wasn't any like weld spatter sitting on them or anything. And then just clamping that bolt down to that flat bar so that will hold it straight. Making sure that it's square to the rest of the attachment in this axis, and I check both sides just to be sure. And after 2 tack welds, I took off all of the jigs and double checked everything. 2 more tack welds on the bottom will make sure that that can't move, and then I can come back and weld it solid. I welded it solid with the bolt still in place, and I'm not sure if this was a good idea or not. I think the bolt probably isn't grade 8 anymore, but it probably helped to keep them straight. And that's pretty much it. Now I can just mount the wheel and see if it tracks properly. The wheel is simply mounted with a 1/2x4 bolt and a nut. And with no tracking adjustment at all, it's tracking that close to perfect. So that's good enough for me. I can bring that over very easily. There, perfect. So right here, it's really close clearance. You might find that that hits on yours, and then you just need to grind off a little bit of this fork side. On mine, it looks like that's gonna be okay, so I'm gonna leave it. Something I forgot to do earlier that I need to take care of now is putting a chamfer on this corner of the bar for this locking handle to press against. If I don't do that, this edge is going to get kind of messed up over time. I took the attachment back apart and painted it along with some parts for other attachments. Contact wheel attachment is done, so let's get started on the small wheel. So this small wheel attachment is designed to use this small wheel holder from knifegrinderparts.com, but due to the centered tool arm on my belt grinder design, I'm not going to use this center piece. Instead, I'm going to use this piece of steel, and it needs to be reduced down to the width of this piece, and then it'll have drilled and tapped holes in the sides for the bolts that hold these sides, and then this can be welded directly onto the tool arm. This centerpiece is 2.363, so I just need to grind this down to that same width. And in the same operation, I'll get these sides flat and smooth and square, so there'll be good surfaces to bolt these parts against. For reducing the width of this and squaring the edges, I've just clamped down the tool arm to my table, and this is mounted at a very slight angle like this. It's probably going to be hard to see. If I push this between here, just the left edge will be scraping this and taking off a very small amount of material. And I'll just pass that through alternating sides until it's the right width. That's still a couple thousandths of an inch bigger, but that's fine. It's close enough. Now I just have to drill and tap holes into the side of this plate to bolt the holder sides on. These holes are only drilled partway through, so that way it's leaving some strength in the middle so I don't weaken the plate too much. The holes in the holder sides are 3/8, so I'm tapping these 5/16 to make it have a little bit of adjustment. And here I'm just doing a quick test assembly to make sure everything fits. I cut off this angled end of the tool arm using the portaband and then use the belt grinder to grind it flat. The center of the plate that I've marked here goes in line with the end of this tool arm. The offcut from the tool arm can be taped on the top, and that'll give me a flat surface to clamp against. Here I'm checking to make sure that this plate is centered on the tool arm and that the sides are parallel to the tool arm. This little spacer will hold this piece at the right distance from the tool arm. These parts need to be chamfered where I've marked here for welding. After tack welding both of these in place, I welded them solid, but I didn't show that because that's boring, and because my camera stopped recording. I ground this little chamfer into the corner of the tool arm for the locking handle to press against. These washers have to be fairly small on the outside diameter to not drag the outer race of the bearing. The deflector wheel goes together as sort of its own sub-assembly with washers and a nut holding it all onto the bolt. And then that gets mounted on this side plate using a stack of washers to make it centered. And now I can install one of the small wheels and put the belt on to see if it tracks properly. It tracks properly when not using the deflector wheel, so now let's reroute the belt under the deflector and see if that still tracks correctly. It took a bit of tweaking on the tracking handle, but it worked just fine. I took the attachment back apart to paint it, and yay, I get to reuse this clip. Before tightening down the bolts, I made sure that both of these holder sides were at the same height and that they were square to each other across the end. I also pressed a flat surface against them to make sure they were parallel. And I double checked that the holder ends were at the same height using a level. I used all of these same techniques when assembling it before, I just didn't show that. And with that, the small wheel attachment is done, the contact wheel attachment is done, and I think this video is done. There's a link in the description to where you can get plans for this, as well as the contact wheel attachment, as well as this adjustable angle table. The adjustable angle table I didn't go into in this video, or the other video, because it hasn't changed from the Gen 1 design. So there's already an old video on my channel about making this table, so you can go back and watch that. I'll link it in the description. So that's it. Thanks for watching.